Welcome back, listeners, to the BizBlend Podcast. I'm your host, Sana. Okay, listeners, so today's guest, well, he sits at a very interesting intersection of leadership, operations, and artificial intelligence. He is an AI strategy consultant, a fractional chief AI officer, and author of the number one bestseller, Lead AI with Confidence. The promise of that book, listeners, it is bold and practical. Ditch the hype, deliver results, and build AI into your team's DNA without becoming a tech guru. In short, he helps leaders beat the 95% AI failure rate using the management skills they already have. And let me tell you that what makes his perspective different is his path. We'll definitely explore that in the conversation. But his journey, it eventually put him in executive roles. No roadmap, no extra time, just reality. And instead of waiting, he built what he wished had existed, a map for non technical leaders to lead AI with confidence. So, listeners, let me tell you, we are going to talk today about what leaders get wrong, what they resist hearing, and why AI leadership might be less about learning something new and more about remembering what already works. So, listeners, meet my incredible guest, John Michael Thomas. John, welcome to BizPlan, and I'm really honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Sana, for having me on, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I very much appreciate it.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. Okay. Let's first. I think the listeners will be very intrigued or interested about this 95% failure rate. So you often say that 95% of AI initiatives fail, and it's a staggering number. So when leaders hear that, I think something the answer is okay, better tools, better vendors, or hiring more technical talent, having the best technical resource. From your experience, John, what is the real reason there?
So there's multiple reasons. I've identified 27 AI failure modes that lead to things not working out right. But the main reason, there's two main reasons. One is we're ignoring some failures from past technology transformations, right? There's certain things that we know that don't work. For example, one of them is trying to force non-technical people to learn new technical skills. It has never worked. It's never going to work, right? And so when people treat AI as if it's just technology and we just need to give people technology training, and they say, hey, you've got to learn prompt engineering and these fancy technical skills, it's just not going to work, right? We know it doesn't work. And so people, and part of this is because of the hype surrounding AI. There's been a lot of hype saying it's magic, literally, Sam Altman said it's a magic box in the sky. No, it's not magic. It's a tool, it's a technology. It has certain things that it does really well, and it has certain other things that it does horribly. And so when you approach it without understanding what it is, you can't make good decisions about what to do. And that's one of the other big failure modes is um I work with some people sometimes and they say, "Hey, I've got this problem and I need AI to solve my problem." And I'm like, um, "Okay, why do you think you need AI to solve the problem?" And they say, "Well, they say it can do everything." Well, it can't do everything. And like, what particular problem are you trying to solve? Well, and they'll give me a problem and I'll say, "Well, you don't have an AI problem. You have a business problem." I had one client, for example,
Mm,
that said, "My product's behind schedule and I think AI can get us caught up." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Why is it behind schedule?" He says, "I don't know, right? I can't understand." I'm like, "Okay, you don't have an AI problem." I said, "You contacted me about AI, but you don't have an AI problem. You have a product management problem, right? You've got a product that's
mm,
behind schedule. You don't know where it is." So a lot of it is people trying to, AI is the latest new shiny thing, and people are saying, "I have a problem. I'm gonna fix it with AI." That's one thing, and they don't know whether AI can really solve it. And the other is they get to say, "Hey, I need to use AI," and they don't even have a problem they're trying to solve. They just want to use AI. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's AI or something else. If you're not trying to solve a particular problem, what's the chance that you actually succeed? It's pretty low. So again, there's a lot of reasons, and leaders approaching it as a technical problem rather than, hey, this is just a management problem and I need to figure out, what it can do and what it can't and where I'm going to put my resources and where I'm not. When leaders learn to do that and treat it as a management problem, all of a sudden it stops being this new thing. Oh, I've got to learn all these new skills. And it becomes this tiny increment on the skills that they already have.
Wow. Very interesting points there, John, because I don't think I have had the opportunity to come across, specifically these observations. And I can actually, make so many, like there are so many parallels coming right now in my mind, when we recollect about the .com and all that, buzz around it, like how it's kind of becoming a bubble here. And everybody's trying to, either dot AI, everything AI, this AI, that AI. Yeah, definitely. It's this shiny new trend. And I think one important point that you mentioned is, that um, every non-technical person can also become an expert, which is not true. Can you give us an example in here, like any company that you worked with or any client that you worked with? Any example in there?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. So one of the,
Mm,
I have a few clients that started out by saying, okay, we need to use AI and we're going to train our team on how to use AI. And so they trained their teams. One particular company, a mid-sized business, in the 10 to $100 million range, which basically they trained their people on it and then nothing changed. And that's because
mm,
they didn't, they addressed it as a technical issue, but they didn't address the barriers that were actually stopping people from using it. And there's a number of them, but one of the biggest ones is trust. So when you ask people, "Hey, go use this new tool," and at some level they don't trust it, they're going to find reasons not to trust it. There's
mm,
other parts of it as well. So for example, when in product adoption and AI, when we
mm,
talk about AI adoption, it's adopting some particular category of products. We talk about friction to the user, and that means that every little extra thing a user needs to do to use a particular feature, or in this case, to use an entire class of stuff with AI,
mhm,
every little bit of friction, every little bit of extra effort that's required to use that reduces the adoption. And so when you take somebody who hasn't learned to trust AI, they don't really know that they can trust what it gives them. And it's
mm,
not just AI they don't trust. They also, some leaders don't like to hear this, but they don't always trust management because there's been a lot of
mm,
talk in the press about, hey, we're going to use AI to replace our people and we're going to reduce our
mm,
headcount. And so when you tell somebody, hey, go use AI, and out of one side of your mouth, and then out of the other side of your mouth, you're saying, hey, you're telling your investors, hey, we're going to reduce our headcount with AI, they don't have a good incentive to actually use AI. Um, you're telling them to use something that could potentially displace them. Now, I will also say that's a very bad use of AI. Almost
mhm,
every example I know of where people tried to replace people with AI has backfired. And that's because, again, AI is very good at doing certain things and it's
mm,
terrible at doing other things, right? So there's certain things that humans are much better than AI at. And when you try to replace a human with that, you fail. So it's not enough to teach people the technology. You have to understand what's the barriers to adoption. That means it comes down to trust. It comes down to enablement. Um, there's companies. I had one company that trained people on how to use AI, but they never actually published a plan, their AI plan to their team. So the team didn't know what to do with it. What am I going to do with this
mm,
tool? How am I supposed to use it? And then people are afraid of using AI. This is another thing that I was a little surprised at, but a lot of people are afraid that if they use AI, they will be
mhm,
looked down on by their coworkers or by their manager as being, as cheating to some extent.
mm,
And so you have to address all these attitudes up front. And one of the most important ways to do that is to communicate clearly with your team. Here's why we're using AI. Here's what we want to do with it. And by the way, you have permission to play with it, and we're going to give you some resources. We're going to pay, you know, there are, I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with that tell their people they want to use AI, but they don't pay for AI tools within their own organization. And so you're basically telling people they have to either use the free tools, which is a really bad idea because then any information, any proprietary information they put in is going to be used to train the next models. You don't want that. You're exposing your private information, or you're telling that they need to spend their own money for these tools. And those things don't work. You need the leadership to come up with a plan and say, here's what we're doing, here's why. Then you address the attitudes, and you don't train everybody at once and just hope they'll get it, right? You have to start with a core, what I call a community of practice, to identify key people in the organization. And you start with them, you train them, and then they lead the pilots and they lead the execution later on. And then there's a lot more to that, but
Mhm.
there's a way to do this that will make you much more successful than just saying, "Hey, we're going to train everybody and we're going to kind of hope that it works," right? That doesn't work with anything. You train a bunch of people on any technology and just hope they use it. It doesn't work, right? You have to build habits. There's a lot that goes into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really, really, really great point, John. Really good one. And let me push back a bit here. Now, some critics would argue, John, that saying you already know how to lead AI, it risks oversimplifying something genuinely complex. Like AI systems, they do behave differently. They have risks that traditional tools did not, like maybe bias, hallucinations, compliance, ethical issues. They are real. I mean, we are seeing some real examples out there happening right now. Is there a danger in telling leaders they do not need to become more technical?
It's a good question, and I mean it's a valid criticism. In the sense that yes, there is a little bit more to it. But
Mm.
what I'm saying is not, hey, you don't have to learn anything new. What I'm saying is instead of having to learn 100% new skills, you can get 80% of the way by relying on your existing skills because AI fits into almost every single framework leaders already know. For example, just using AI yourself, one of the things I say constantly is, using AI is not it's not something new and different. What it really is delegation. And so if you are a manager who's already learned how to delegate, which by the way is a skill that is hard to learn to do well. But if you've learned how to delegate well and you realize that when you're using AI yourself, you're really just delegating part of your work, it becomes much easier to just again have an incremental bit of skill there instead of, hey, I've got to learn this whole new thing. Where does AI fit? I don't know. Because one of the biggest issues I have with my clients when they first come to me, the number one issue they have is AI overwhelm. There's too much information and they have no idea what to do next. And so when you realize that it fits into what you already know, now instead of having to learn something brand new, and try to understand the technology when the reality is you don't need to understand the technology. You just need to understand what the technology can do and what it
Mhm.
can't do. And, another one of the failures that I see is companies will they'll create this big AI strategy. And I'll say, that's great. That's great. You've done that. How much do you use AI yourself? And they'll say, well, I don't use AI. And I'm like, well, how did you create a strategy when you don't even know what it can do?
Using AI.
So, I always tell leaders that, you need to use AI yourself. That's actually where I start. I say, "I'm gonna teach you how to use AI. In 1 to 2 hours, I will make you better at using AI than anybody you know." Or not anybody, but, 90% of the people you know. And the way I do that is by teaching them to treat it as delegation. And I have a simple framework
Mhm.
for that. And the interesting thing about that is when you treat it as delegation, I've got one framework that works for delegating to both AI and to humans. And if you use it, a lot of managers actually get a little better at delegating to humans than they were before. And so again, the answer to that criticism is, yes, you're right. They're gonna have to learn something new. But instead of having to learn 100% new, they'll learn 10, 20% on top, right? So it's a matter it's more like saying, okay, we need to add a new function to the company, or we have somebody new here who's got some new skills we haven't used yet, and we need to learn what they're good at and what they're not, so we know how best to use them. And that's a management skill.
Definitely. It is. It is. And I think this is where exactly the nuance really, really matters, John. Really matters. Um, okay, let's focus on your career story because it's a bit unusual. Like you went from being a reluctant person to solve problems. I mean, involving logistics, culture, politics, like, from everything engineer to AI leader. How did this everything engineer phase shape how you now advise leaders on AI?
Well, it's a great question. I'll try to keep this short, but I've been around the planet a few times, so I do have a bit of a history. I started my career as a software engineer. Actually, in those days, we didn't call it software engineering. I was a programmer.
Mm-hmm.
And, I got sent into the field to solve problems, and I wasn't really wild about it. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, we had problems out in the field. We had, installations all over the world. We had problems out in the field, and people couldn't fix them. And so, um, people thought it was a software problem. They grabbed me, and I got on a plane, and I went to solve the problems. And what I found was when I got out to the field, a lot of it wasn't software problems, it was something else. It was hardware problems or system problems. And so, then I went beyond those, and now I was getting thrown at problems where, it wasn't even technical at all. It was politics, it was, we had cases where, the salespeople sold things that we didn't have. I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with the software if they sold software we don't have, but I still had to go out in the field and actually create what they sold. And then we even had cases where people sabotaged their installations, like intentional sabotage, and I had to go find it and fix it. So, I say, I grew in the field from a software engineer to a systems engineer to an everything engineer because my job when I got out there was to fix the problem, whatever it was. And I only got on a plane when everybody else had already failed to solve the problem. So, by the time I got there, not only was it a bad problem nobody knew anything about, but also the customer was already upset. So I was under pressure and I had to figure out what the heck was going on and how to solve it using a lot of things that I had no experience with. I did not like hardware. I wasn't real fond of people when I started, and I had to learn hardware. I had to learn systems. I had to learn how to, be political and build relationships and all that in order to solve these problems. And so after I'd done that for a while, they started pulling me in to fix management problems and executive team problems. And so that's how I got into the executive suite. So I started as fully hands-on, and then I ended up getting pulled into management where I was where I was again hands-on. And for the book and my focus on AI, that actually was not my first focus for my book. I wrote an entire book on how to solve the most difficult problems. And then when I worked with my publisher, he said, "Go talk to people about the book and see what they think about it." And what I found was nobody wanted my book. The people that might get the most value out of it thought they already knew how to do that, and other people just weren't interested. And so I said, "Okay." And so when I started going to my clients and saying, "What is your biggest problem?" They all said AI. And I said, "Well, funny, it turns out that I'd already done that." So before I started my consulting business, in my last role, I was running operations at an enterprise software company, and
Mhm.
I was overloaded, understaffed, overworked, and then AI hit the scene. And I was like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for the world to change. But what I figured out was I had this sense that something was shifting. So I said, okay, I'm going to take that on anyway. So on top of everything else I did, I created our AI initiative, I implemented it, and we came out with a full suite of AI features in, less than 6 months. And, so I did that all without a map. And so like, you said something that's part of what I say is, when I started talking to leaders and they said, "Hey, we need to know how to deal with AI," I said, "Okay, I'm gonna create the map that I didn't have." And so, both from my experience and working with people and talking with people, I've had over 100 interviews so far. Um, I said, "Okay, we now have a map. Here's how you do it." Then that comes down to understanding where you are in the process. There's 6 stages that you go through to transform your organization, from,
Mhm.
doing nothing with AI to making it part of just how you work. And I have a roadmap. I have I call it a 3 by 2 phase roadmap for, basically going for quick wins, big wins, and the forever win with AI, which is, getting something you can do really quickly, then getting stuff that actually adds business value, and finally making AI just part of the way things work so that it's not special anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I love that fluidity. I mean, it's like it's actually a um very interesting, combination. And I think now I can see, it's like, every day you are facing some new problems, some new challenges out there. And with the pressure added on to it, you are trying to find out a solution. And this is timeless. This is timeless, whether we have the .com or we have the AIs and, whatnot in the future. I think this particular kind of approach and a kind of a strength, it is timeless, John. So that is really, really incredible.
Thank you. And you've mentioned a couple times, .com, and there are definitely parallels to the .com, both in how we do things right, how we do things wrong. Um, and another thing that I say, and I like to say this so people understand where I'm coming from is, I'm a fractional CAIO, a chief AI officer, but that
Mhm.
title has a shelf life because, when we went through the internet, I'm old enough that I went from paper to computers on the desktop, and I went
Yeah.
through the dot-com bubble. And, when we went through that, nobody knew what to do with the internet, right? Everybody was figuring out in real time. People were, some were successful, some were failing. But nowadays, nobody says, "Hey, I'm the chief internet officer." Nobody gets excited that they use the internet today because it's now just part of how everything works. And eventually AI is going to get there. So within 5 to 10 years, you're not going to see chief AI officer. What it really is, what the chief AI officer really is a chief transformation officer. It's somebody to say, "Hey, we've got some new big thing here, and we need somebody to help us get to where it becomes just the way things are." And so, that's what I'm doing really. And AI is the term. That's what I use. That's what everybody's looking for. But ultimately, you're not going to see CIOs likely in 10 years.
That's really a brilliant point. Yeah, it is true. It is true. But then I think, yeah, digital transformations, I think this is going to be, uh,
That's timeless because right after AI, there's going to be something else. Maybe it's humanoid robots. I don't know what it's going to be, but there will be something else.
yeah, sure. Um, John, before we wrap up,
Mhm.
we have already, as leaders, entered New Year. Now we are exhausted by hype cycles, constant change, kind of,
Yeah.
this anxiety that, okay, 2025 was that. What about 2026? So if a CEO or a founder listening wanted to reset their approach to AI in the next, okay, let's take 90 days, what
Mhm.
is the first thing they should stop doing?
Stop doing.
Stop.
Um, Stop using AI for the sake of just using AI. Make sure that you're solving a real business problem, number one. And number two, make sure that AI is the right solution to that problem. So AI, using AI for the most part is automation. But there's no reason if you say, "Hey, I've got this process and I need to automate it," there's no reason you have to use AI to automate it. Sometimes you actually want an algorithm to automate it because an algorithm is extremely consistent, and most people don't realize up front that AI is not consistent. In geek terms, we call it non-deterministic, right? Which means you
Mm.
can ask the same exact question in 20 minutes apart, and you will get different answers every single time. So understand, make sure you're solving a real problem. Again, number one. Number two, make sure that AI is the right solution to that problem. And if you
Mm.
don't understand whether it's the right solution, then you need to learn a little bit. And again, let me back up a little bit. I'm going to say number one, make sure you're using AI yourself because that's going to teach you what you
Yeah,
need to know about what it can and can't do. Then make sure you're solving a real business problem, and then make sure that AI is the right solution to that problem.
exactly. Whether it is fitting into that solution or not.
Exactly. 100%.
Super, super. Brilliant. And John, of course, if our listeners, they would also like to further connect with you, maybe they would have definitely some opinions, thoughts to share with you. What would be the easiest way?
I have no opinions. Um, which means I have lots of opinions. The best way to reach me is please feel free to find me and reach out on LinkedIn. But if you go to johnmichaelthomas.ai, um, that is my main website, and you can schedule a meeting with me. You can go find my book from there, and there's some downloads as well if you want to get some idea, a little sneak peek into what's in the book and what I help leaders through. There's some downloads you can get that's going to show you some of those things.
Brilliant. Listeners, as I always do, I'm going to have all the links in the show notes. So just refer to them along with this episode on whichever platform you're listening to your podcast. And as we close this conversation, I think if there is one takeaway for all of your listeners, it is this: AI does not demand a new version of you, it demands a clearer, braver, more disciplined version of the leader you already are. So, John, thank you so much. This was such a, once again, a brilliant conversation. Very different one on AI. Refreshing one. Thank you so much. Really loved it.
Sana, thank you so much, and I really love the way you summarize that takeaway. It's language I don't use, but I may steal it. Thank you so much for having me on, Sana.
Thank you, John, and to all of our listeners. If this episode made you uncomfortable, that is usually a sign that it mattered. Until then, see you next time on BizBlend. This is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.